Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to Pearson English Spring Days. My name is Richard, I'm based in London, and I'd like to introduce you to today's, or this morning's webinar on how to teach remotely with Roadmap by Lindsay Warwick. Lindsay is a teacher, a trainer, and materials writer. She has been teaching general English and exam preparation courses for more than 20 years. She's also a CELTA trainer and has delivered teacher development courses on topics such as trainer-trainer, using technology in the classroom, and helping learners to prepare for exams. There will be time for questions at the end of this webinar, and if you can put them in the chat, either during the webinar or at the end, I'll try and capture them so that we can ask Lindsay for some answers. But with that, I'll leave you in Lindsay's hands. Over to you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Richard. Hello, everybody. I'm just looking at your comments. Hello. So hello from the southwest of England. It's a beautiful sunny day here. I hope it's lovely where you are. I can see that we've got people from all corners of the globe, which is always fantastic. Isn't it wonderful that we can all come together and talk about something similar like this? I just think it's great. So yeah, thank you very much for chatting. So the session then today is really looking at online teaching. I should do some housekeeping first. Just to remind you that this webinar is recorded. And within 2 weeks of this webinar, you will receive a link to that recording, and also you'll get a personalised certificate and a very exciting virtual goodie bag. So with a few sort of things there that you may be able to use in your classroom. Okay, so let's crack on then. So the topic then is how to teach remotely with Roadmap. Roadmap is the new general English series from Pearson, and you may be familiar with it, you may not be. You may be interested in basically teaching remotely with a course book, or you may be interested specifically in teaching with this course book. Either way, hopefully I'm going to give you some ideas of how you might use a course book in online lessons using the tools that you have at hand in your platform. Now, I'm afraid I am going to talk at you a little bit in this session, partly because I'm going to actually demonstrate the resources, the digital resources and tools that come with Roadmap, and I'm going to do that through Zoom. And at the moment, we're using Click Meeting, so I'm going to be using Zoom and the digital resources through Click Meeting. I'm not going to be able to see all of your chat, but please, you chat together, and please pass any questions on through the chat, and we will then I'll be able to answer those at the end. So over the last couple of months, I've been lucky enough to work with quite a lot of teachers from around the world and to hear the sort of concerns that they have, and I'm sure some of these concerns ring true with you. A lot of teachers who have been pushed online, who perhaps had never even thought about teaching online before, now suddenly having to teach sometimes large groups online, sometimes reluctant groups online as well. So concerns are things like, how can I encourage interaction among my students, especially if you've got a large class, and especially if you don't have the full sort of set of tools in the platform that you use. It's very easy, isn't it, when you go online to sort of feel like you need to talk a lot, and it starts to become more of a lecture, a bit like what I'm doing today, so it's not a very good example. Birgit, no sound. I think maybe Richard will be able to help you with that. Hopefully other people should be able to hear me. Okay, let me know if you all can't hear me, please, and then we'll sort that out. So interaction, obviously we don't want to just keep talking, we want students to interact as well. How can I engage my students? A lot of concern about how you motivate students and how you get them. I suppose sometimes they're creating a rapport if you don't know them that well, but if you know your students, how you can keep them involved in the lesson throughout. Also, how you can deal with learner differences as well when you've got stronger and weaker in the same room. A lot of teachers concerned about how they can test students online, because obviously, it's a bit different from being in a face-to-face classroom. And also how you can use your course book online as well, or what materials to use even. I mean, before all of the situation with COVID-19, I think a lot of teachers were teaching online one-to-ones and very small classes, and would often perhaps create their own materials or curate their own materials based on their learners' needs. But now with longer courses going online, with larger groups, obviously there's perhaps more of a need for consistency there to follow a course and a syllabus that's already created, so a course book can do that. So what I'm going to do now, as I said, I'm going to actually share my screen with you. That's the first thing I need to do. Okay. Right, so now I'm going to bring up Zoom. We're looking through a mirror, in this, so bear with me. Right. So now I'm in Zoom, which of course there are lots of different platforms. So this is just one example that I've chosen today. I'm now going to show you the digital resources. So the aim is for me to show you the digital resources and tools that come with Roadmap, briefly talk about the tools that are on Zoom, and then actually show you how we would use a course book in a classroom. So let's go to the website. All right. Actually, I'm just going to share my computer sound with you so you can hear it. Good. Okay. The first thing you need to do then, if you want to use the digital tools and resources with Roadmap, is to go to Zoom, go to your browser, and to type in, I always type in english.com. It's the easiest way for me to remember the website. And it'll take you to the Pearson English website, where you can then go to sign in and sign into the Pearson English portal. That's where you and your students will find the digital resources that come with your Pearson coursebook. So Pearson English portal, and then you need to register or create an account. It's very simple, and then you can sign in. Once you sign in, it'll take you to your dashboard. So this is my dashboard here. Now, the first time you go on here, it will be empty. So you need to click on Add a Product. And on the inside of your teacher's book, you will see an access code with about 20 digits in it, like you can see here, or there's a QR code that you can scan, and then you add product. You might have been given a code by a sales rep if you've been in contact with them about your course books as well. So type in your access code, and then your product will appear on your screen. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, I've chosen a B1 Plus level, so it's Roadmap B1 Plus. And the first thing I'm going to show you is the presentation tool and resources. So I'm going to click on that. And the presentation tool is actually a digital version of your coursebook. And the resources are digital versions of the resources that come with your coursebook. So as you can see, what you've got here are all 8 units, all 10 units in the coursebook. So I've chosen a lesson in Unit 6 for this one. So you just click on your unit, and you can see here that you've got the lessons in the unit laid out for you to choose. Now, for those of you familiar with Roadmap, you'll know that there's 4 lessons in every unit. So you've got 6A, 6B, 6C and 6D, which is a kind of functional English lesson. And then you've got your check and reflect review material at the end. But Roadmap follows a kind of twin track approach. So you've got a fast track, which is basically doing every lesson in the main units, every 4 lessons in every main unit. But you've also got an extended track where you can actually bring in some additional material from the back of the book. And these are called the Develop Your Lessons. And we've got 1 Develop Your Reading lesson, 1 Develop Your Listening lesson, and 1 Develop Your Writing lesson for every unit of the book. And what they do, it really helps students to develop their sub-skills in those particular skills. So they're focusing on a particular area of reading, like being able to understand inference, for example, something like that. Okay, so you've got it all here, so you can just click on it and bring it up. Now, when you're planning your lesson, you can click on the plan page. So this is our lesson we're going to do, 6A. So I'm going to click on plan, and then you can actually just bring up each part of the lesson step by step. So you've got the lesson summary, which we can preview here. There we go, that's the lesson summary. But you've also got next to it the teacher's notes as well. So you can go through step by step if you want to plan. So then you've got the next task here, and then you've got the notes to go with it. So these are all the teacher's notes here, and you've got the answer keys and all of the things that you have in the teacher's notes. You could view the full lesson plan here, and then you see all of the teacher's notes in one go. So that's possibly why you would use this particular feature, I think, so you can see everything there in one place. Okay, so that's the plan feature. And then you've got the actual teach feature. So this is what you'll do in the classroom, as I'll show you shortly. You click on teach, and then you can just simply go through every step of the way. So here you've got the lesson overview, and then we can click here onto lesson flow. So we can click on full screen. That's the best thing to do. So you can go to lesson flow, and then you click to the next exercise, and then the next one, then the next one, or you can go here, let's close that down, or we can go to page view, and it shows the whole page, and then we just click on those little yellow dots to go to each exercise. So that's the digital resource, that's the presentation tool we can use, and I'll show you that in more detail when we talk through some actual activities. So we're going to look at some exercises and how we might actually implement them in an online lesson. So if I go now to resources, you can see that what we've got here are in one place. So actually in the book, in the presentation tool, you have all of the audio and all of the video embedded into the pages. So you don't actually need to come out of that, which you'll see shortly. But if you want to access the audio and download some of the audio, then you've got it all in one place here. You've got the workbook audio. You've also got all the videos. There's a video at the end of every unit. There's a video and worksheets there for you to download as well. And there are all the tests that you can download here. You've got all the photocopyables. So you've got 3 photocopyables for every lesson, 1 vocabulary and 2 grammar. We've also got special mediation worksheets. So these are designed to help students to develop particular mediation skills. We develop them within the book, but this is in addition to that. We've also got pronunciation materials as well. So we've got one pronunciation worksheet for every unit. So this is where you can find all those particular things here. So if I click on tests, for example, you've got unit tests, achievement tests, mid and end course tests, you've got the answer key and the audio, and actually you've got them in PDF and Word format. So you can change the Word ones if you want as well. You can take out some exercises, or maybe, you know, add an exercise in if you have done something in addition to the book. Now, in terms of testing, one of the things that teachers often worry about is how you test in the online classroom. And I think really that the testing needs to be more formative. So it needs to be that kind of informal assessment that we make in lessons all of the time, by reading their answers in the chat box, by listening to their answers they give orally, by monitoring their speaking when they're in breakout rooms, by doing little quizzes, or giving them a progress test like this to do for homework, and maybe then checking them together and asking students themselves to kind of think about what they did well in and what they need more help in. So it's that kind of assessment that provides ongoing feedback that we use in an online classroom more than formal testing that produces a grade. Because obviously no one really wants to sit with a computer on and do a test. Certainly if they're paying for that lesson, it does seem, you know, a little bit of a waste of a lesson. So what we can do is give students tests to do at home. And of course, they might cheat in inverted commas, but if they're looking up the answers, then some of those answers might actually go in, they might actually work out the meaning, they might actually understand it better. So, you know, I think that's okay for me personally. So that's the presentation tool, and those are the resources. If I go to the dashboard, we've got some other things here as well. So at the moment, students have access to a flipbook, and this is actually becoming an ebook. So they put their code in, and they actually get, so I'll just click on this briefly. So they basically get a version of the book with the audio and the video embedded, and they can actually, it's not going to come up, is it? They can actually type and add some notes to it, and they can highlight things and things like that. So they have here, they can just flick through. So if we just click on, so 6A is the lesson, so they just click on here and it will take them to the lesson. They can zoom in, they can play the audio and so on. So at the moment, students have access to a flipbook, but soon they'll have access to this e-read version as well. I think it's a bit slow because all things are doing on the computer at the moment, but there you go, that's the student version. There's also access, if you have the course book that has access to My English Lab, which is a sort of digital version of the workbook, then you can actually access it from here. And what this does is provides extra vocabulary and grammar practice, some functional language practice there, and also some additional listening, reading and writing practice for each unit. And you can actually set assignments, and you can look at the gradebook to see how students are doing. So that's a good way of formatively assessing your students, and it's a good way of creating a blended course as well. So you're doing your face-to-face lessons, then students are doing work outside of the classroom. So those are the tools that are available. Let's now just go back to Zoom. So this is my platform. So of course I've got some tools here that I can use. And of course what we do in the online classroom is very much about adapting to the tools at hand. Just as we do in different classrooms, we might go into a classroom without an interactive whiteboard, maybe no CD player, maybe not even a board at all sometimes. And we have to adapt to that. So the tools that we've got here are our share screen option. So we can actually click on share screen, and then we can show whatever is on our screen to our students. So that could be a PowerPoint presentation, a Word document, or our roadmap presentation tool. We've also got the whiteboard here where we can add some text, we can draw. So this is a great place obviously for recording new vocabulary, for highlighting pronunciation features of words, for recording the form of grammar. All of the things that we might use a board for in the face-to-face classroom, we can do on this particular board here. And you can save it as well at the end of the lesson and share it with students. And of course, you can then bring it up in future lessons as well, or share it with students that missed the class because they were sick, for example. We've also got our chat here. And this is the group chat where all the students or all participants in the class can chat together. So this is great for a lot of different things. It's great for getting feedback on tasks from students, getting answers to questions from students, students asking questions, maybe putting some errors on the board and getting students to correct them via the group chat. It's fantastic because everybody is replying at the same time. So unlike doing it orally in a classroom or in an online classroom, then you're getting answers from a lot of students. You're assessing all of their learning at the same time and keeping them engaged and busy, which is important as well. You can also, although I'm in the only person in Zoom at the moment, if I had my students here, I could also write personal messages so that I can actually contact individual learners. So they could ask me questions, but also I can give them some support. I can ask them if they're okay, if they seem not to be okay. I can give some language prompts if I feel that they need some help with that. I could give some clues to some exercises. And also you could get students to actually talk to each other as well. So there is private chat between students unless you decide to deactivate it in your settings. So you could get students to chat and do a task on their own in English. We don't know if they're doing it in English. That's the only problem. We can't see them. But if they're adults, we need to maybe trust them. And then they can report back to the group chat in English, but more about that a bit later. We also have our lovely breakout rooms, and this is where we can create these smaller rooms to put pairs and groups for speaking activities or collaborative activities, I should say. So it's quite simple. You just choose the number of rooms that you want to create. You can automatically assign students to those rooms. So if you've got 20 students in 10 rooms, it will put them into pairs. Or you can manually do it, in which case you then choose who goes into each room. It takes a little bit longer, so you need to make sure that when you're putting students into breakout rooms, it needs to be a nice meaty task, doesn't it? Nothing too quick, otherwise the setting up of the room can take longer than the actual discussion. Once you've done that, we can create our rooms, and then we can actually join the rooms one by one, so we can't see what all students are doing. Which is a shame. In a face-to-face classroom, obviously you can keep your eyes on the students and see that they're all engaged and doing something, but we can't listen to them all closely at the same time. And one thing I do like about online teaching is that you can actually drop into a room and really listen to a pair or a group for a good minute. and really assess their speaking without being distracted by all the noise in the classroom and other students asking for things and so on. So I think, you know, and students can still ask you questions while they're in those rooms, and you'll be able to send answers or to go and visit them and help them. So we've got the breakout rooms. Also, students have the opportunity to raise their hand, which is a great feature, not on all platforms, but we've got it here. And in Zoom, obviously a lot of information about security, so you've got some security features here. At the moment, you have to, all students arrive in a waiting room, as you did on this session, and then we obviously have to let them in. That stops other people from bombing the rooms. But there's also things here like stopping students from renaming themselves, stopping students from chatting, and also stopping them from sharing their screens. And if you go to the settings on Zoom, you have a lot more choice there as well, so you can do other things as well. Okay, so those are our roadmap digital tools and resources, and those are the tools on the particular platform. Now let's have a think about a lesson. So my lesson is 6A. It is about films and TV. So the first thing I'm going to do when students, just before students arrive, I'm actually going to type a message into here. Actually, I think I'm just going to focus on TV. Okay, so I'm going to type a question, a discussion question, so that when students arrive, they know in my lessons that while they're sitting and waiting, they can actually start a discussion in the chat. So I can encourage students to answer and then to respond to each other as well. And that means that when students are coming into the room, I can then talk and make sure I greet them individually, because I think it's really nice for engagement and motivation to say, you know, hi Claudia, how are you? How was your day today? Just even if it's just simply that, and you know, can we hear you? Can we check everything's all right? Lovely. And then you can also ascertain, of course, which students are unable to show their video, which are unable to show audio, who is potentially only chatting in the chat box as well. Because I think one of the really important things in our lessons is that we need to make sure that we are involving all of our students. And it can be very easy for those not on video, can't it, or those who are only chatting because they can't even use audio. It can be very easy to forget them. So it's important that we do sort of note those things and make sure that we include them during the lesson. So that's my little welcome. And then, of course, we're going to start with a warmer. And I think even more so online than in a face-to-face classroom, we need to do that because it engages the learners from the beginning. And I think we can adapt all those nice things you do in a face-to-face class. And I really think we can adapt very much to an online environment. So I'm really, really, really bad at drawing, right? But I'm thinking of a TV series. I'm going to draw it, and I'd like you to tell me in the chat box. I'd like you to tell me what you think the TV series is. Okay. All right. So I'm bad at drawing anyway, but of course now I'm using a mouse, so it's even worse. All right, here we go. And I'm going to ask Richard to perhaps come on. Actually, I might be able to find your comments in a moment to see what you think it might be. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I mean, you know, when I do things like this, it amuses me if it doesn't amuse my students. Okay, I'm sure those of you who saw this program, you're getting it now. So let's see if I can find you and your chat. I might not be able to actually. Oh, here we go. Let's see, we've got this hand needs gloves. Okay, it's very difficult to draw. It is. Okay, so we've got Game of Thrones, GOT, handshake bird, Damien. So much. I don't think you watched it, did you? So there you go. You should have watched it, then you'd have known. It's not. Okay, lovely. Good. Bart Simpson, Anna. Yeah, that does look a bit like Bart Simpson, doesn't it? Anyway. So going back to my rubbish. Anyway, there you go. So it's a fun little warmer, just getting students obviously choosing a series that they might know the name of in English, drawing a picture, and then of course I can now pick a student and they can actually use the board themselves because it's interactive. They can do the same. Other students can type in the chat box what they think it is. Very quick, very simple. You know, next time I choose different students for the warmer, so everyone gets a go at this kind of thing. All right. Okay, so now we're going to start our material. We're going to use our material. So I'm going to click on share screen. Now it's really important if you're using Zoom, in fact, any tool you need to check on this, you might need to share your computer sound. So in order for me to actually play the audio for you to hear, I need to click that icon there. And now I'm going to share my screen. And to reduce that, I'm going to go here to my dashboard. I'm going to go down to my course book, my presentation tool of my course book. And, oh, I've clicked on the wrong thing, this one, sorry. I'm going to go to Unit 6, and I'm going to click on Teach of the lesson that we're doing today. And now we've got the lesson overview. So obviously it's very good practice to kind of make students aware of what exactly the goal of the lesson is, what is it we're trying to achieve. And this is talking about films and TV, and we're going to be thinking about passive and using vocabulary related to cinema and TV. So I could actually ask students to respond to this. So one thing that I sometimes do, and I'm going to bring up the teaching tools here, and I'm going to click up draw. Oh, it's not going to be very good again, sorry. All right, so I need a much steadier hands. My hands are actually really cold, that's why. So 1 to 5. So 1 is, well, 5 is very confident. And 5 is, sorry, and 1 is not so confident. So I'll ask my students in the chat box. So I will bring up my, so I'm going to go up here. I'll bring up my chat box. There we go. So I'll ask my students to actually type a number from 1 to 5. How confident do they feel they can do this already? Now, B1 plus, I imagine that a lot of them will feel quite confident about it, actually. But when we start to think about, well, you know, could you do it using the passive form? Do you think you could use a range of vocabulary? So I could encourage them to think about those things and then get a sense of their levels of confidence. Then at the end of the lesson, I can come back and actually do the same thing. Now, can you type the number you put at the beginning and type another number? And we can compare and see. It's a good way of finding out from students how they feel about what they're learning. And also it's a good springboard for a discussion about actually where we go next. Do we need to do more on this? Do you need more practice? Would you like some more homework? What would you like to do? So I'm just going to click on that to get rid of that. Now, to go to the next page, there are 2 ways. I can click on here, lesson. In fact, I'm going to go to full screen. That's the best thing to do. So full screen, I can go to lesson flow here and then just click on the next activity and go there. Or I can click on page view, as I showed you before, and click here. So this is the first activity. It's the lead into the topic. We've had our sort of little warmer, but now we're going to get students actually speaking and discussing. Now, I'm not going to go through every single activity in this lesson, of course, but I'm going to pick out some sort of common ones that we might do in the face-to-face class and think about how we do them online. So, of course, we have lots of pair discussions, don't we? We have it before readings and listenings. To activate schemata, to get students thinking about or activating their vocabulary, their knowledge before they read or listen. We often do it after reading or listening to get students to react to it. Students might answer questions and discuss things in order to practice vocabulary, practice grammar, and so on. So there are a few different ways that we can do that online, of course. If you've got a smaller class, you can do it orally. You can ask students to nominate themselves, or you could nominate students to answer a question and they can nominate another student to answer, and you can get them to ask each other follow-up questions and to generate a classroom discussion. And we can do that by, you know, we can keep our TTT low. We can simply just use a student's name and we can train them to be able to then. So now you nominate, you ask a student, and then we get them to sort of create this discussion on their own. If you've got a larger class, of course, it's more difficult. So we can use the chat box. And the chat box is strange, isn't it? Because when you chat in a chat box, you are actually, I think, you are speaking, but you're also writing, because you're using the sort of language that you'd use to speak, but you have slightly longer than you would normally to reply if you're doing it orally. But it's a very, very, very common form of discussion, a very common form of communication. So, you know, it's very valid and it's very useful, and particularly at the moment, we're communicating a lot in this way. I remember a long time ago, weekly calls to my mum on a Sunday night. I don't think I've spoken on the phone to my mum for a really long time now. It's basically chatting, you know, and it feels like we're talking in person. So you can bring up the chat box, get students to answer the questions in the chat box. And we've got 2 questions here to keep things simple. We can actually use this hide option here, and we can actually just hide one of the questions to say, can you answer these? Can you answer the 2 questions here? And then they type in the chat box. And then we could reveal the second one and they can type it there as well. How do we do feedback for that? Well, we could get students to read each other's. We could say, right, now can you read each other's comments, and can you pick out maybe 2 or 3 things that you think people have in common, or 2 or 3 things that interested you? Or can you go through and find and think of a question you'd like to ask somebody about what they wrote? And then orally, you could nominate a student and say, okay, so can you report back, or can you ask your question to the student? And not everyone will be able to ask their questions, not everyone will be able to give their comments, but by asking everyone to get ready with an answer, they're all having to do the work. And then if you randomly nominate students, they know they've got to be ready. So they're all thinking in their minds, and then we just need to make sure that during the lesson, we are nominating all students at least once if we can. Of course, if you've got breakout rooms, then you can put students into pairs or small groups, and they can go off in the breakout rooms and they can discuss these questions. That's really the easiest way of doing it and the best way for developing speaking skills. But not all of you have access to breakout rooms with the platform that you're using. Another alternative is to get students to talk privately on the chat. The problem with that is you can't see what they're saying, but you could give them a little bit of time to talk. You know, you could give them a couple of minutes to maybe ask one of these questions and discuss it, come back, and then they have to summarize their discussion, or they have to report what their partner said in the chat box in English. So we can't see what they're chatting there, but the feedback is in English, so that can be useful as well. It's an alternative, a different way of doing it that we could use. So those are some alternatives to that particular type of activity. And to get rid of this toolbar, my teaching tools, I'm going to click on here. Oh, actually, before that, I am going to show you some quite cool things here, if that's okay. You've got some nice widgets. So this can be useful. There's a timer. So if you're going to do a little activity, then you can set up, you can set your time. You can get it to count down, so you can time students to do things if you need that. There's also a scoreboard, so if you're doing a quiz, then you can add teams. And I think, you know, if you've got quite manageable groups, then you can have students working in 2s or 3s. You can give them a question and they have to quickly collaborate together. Everyone will hear them, but I think it's fine. You can do it that way, and then you can just add the scores here as well. So that's a great way of keeping team scores ready, or you know, keep it clear for everyone to see. And then you've got a dictionary, so good for learner autonomy here. So it goes to the Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English. So if we look up the word widget, you can see it brings up all the information we need. But also, I think this is great, these examples from the corpus. You've got lots more examples of the language in context to look at. So that's good for learner independence, I think. So I'm just going to click there to get rid of that. Okay, let's look at another type of exercise. So here we've got a Gapfill exercise. Now in the digital tools, in the presentation tool, it's actually drag and drop. So we can actually elicit the first answer from the class, we can say, right, type in the chat box, what do you think the answer is here? And then I can drag here, and then I can actually check and see, yeah, well, we've got 1 out of 10, so that's correct there. So that one's fine, good. So we can do the first one as a demonstration. Then students can obviously go to their ebooks or their flip books or their paper copy of their book, now that they're clear about exactly what it is that they're doing and what they have to do. Then we need to give students time to do the task. Now, if one of the things that's really difficult online is, of course, we don't know what students are doing. If they haven't got their videos on, we can't see. They might have done the task. They might have gone off to make coffee. We're not really sure. So this is where the raise hands can be really useful. If we tell students, can you raise your hand when you've finished, so I know you've finished, then you know when to stop the activity. If you've got fast finishers, you can, of course, ask them to, so you can bring up the chat again. Go. And you can say to students, okay, so can you, if you finish before we finish the activity, you can just, I won't waste your time typing the instructions, but you can just type some instructions into the group chat saying, please write 2 or 3 sentences about yourself using 3 of the words in the exercise, and you can give an example so they know what an example would be. And then the fast finishers are engaged and they're doing something in the chat box. I think it's really useful for fast finisher activities. And they can have a little discussion there as well. We can ask them questions, we can get them talking, tell us more about this, that kind of thing. And then when we stop the activity, it's also a good assessment tool, because I can see have they really understood the vocabulary, the sentences or not, the vocabulary or not within the sentences. Okay. When students are finished, we can then check answers. So we can do it orally by nominating students to give us answers. We can try and keep it pacey. It can be difficult online, but we can say, okay, so Paolo, what do you think number 2 is? Marina, do you agree? Christy, do you agree with that? And then, okay, good. So you can sort of try and get students to be quite quick when they give you answers, to try and keep the pace fairly speedy. You could also get students to type their answers into the chat box, although I feel that's a little bit, if they've done the gap fill, it's a little bit repetitive and can drop pace a little bit, but it's an alternative. Or you could show the answers and students could check their own answers, and then you could ask them in the chat box, or you could nominate and say, okay, which ones were difficult? Which ones we're not sure about? Do you have any questions about that? Now, you can, of course, then follow up on this, because just because they've done the gap fill doesn't mean that they've understood the meaning. So we can actually say things like, okay, so one of these words means boring. Can you type in the chat box which word means boring? Which means very funny. And, you know, if you give them sufficient time, so that it's not just the fast finishers, we need to make sure we give enough time for everybody to answer, and then we can confirm the answer. So that's a good way of checking. It's concept checking, basically, isn't it, using the chat box. So gap fill exercises, they're often drop down or also type in as well, so we can actually type our answers in. Okay, let's go and look at another type of activity. So here we've actually got a follow-up exercise. So this is a discussion. So you can do it in the different ways I talked about with the discussion earlier. The point of this is to get students to think a bit more deeply about some of the vocabulary they've just looked at. It's not very personalised. I like to include some personalisation. So what I'm going to do now is actually go to my, I'm going to come out of this. I'm going to go to my resources. I'm going to go to my photocopyable for Unit 6. And I'm going to choose the vocabulary one for this lesson. And now I've got some more personalised questions for discussion. And of course, I can use these in various ways here. I can send it to students before the lesson or during the lesson, and I can put them into breakout rooms and they can then discuss the questions in pairs or small groups. So that's a nice meaty speaking task. The reason I would send it to them before the class is because when they're in the breakout rooms, they can't actually see what I share with them or what is on, if I show them something on the screen, or if they put something in the chat box or on the interactive whiteboard, they won't be able to see that. So students will need to open it separately. And if they're on phones, they can do that, by the way. So they can open a document. If they're in Zoom, their video will go, but their audio will remain. So students will be able to hear each other, which is, of course, the main thing. They might not be using video anyway. If you don't have breakout rooms, you can, of course, do some oral discussion with the whole class and ask some of the questions, or get a student to choose a question and ask another student, and so on. Or you could get students to, we can choose one or two questions and get them to type their answers into the chat box. So those are all possible ways of using that. Okay, so I'm going back to my presentation tool. And let's go to, let's look at the reading. So here we've got an article about the golden age of TV. And in fact, if we click on attachment, we can see the article here. And this is quite nice because you can, again, use the teaching tools and you can highlight certain parts of the text if you want to. So let's close that. The highlighting does remain, but we'll leave it there. That's fine. So we would need to clear that, I think. Okay, this is the sort of first reading task, the gist task, to get students to understand the gist of what they're reading. They have to read the article and then identify the main point. So again, very easy because the answer is 1, 2, or 3. Students can read it. We can set a time limit using our timer if we want. Students then type in the chat box their answer. We can assess, have they all got it right? If so, we can just ask one student to justify why. If we've got a difference of opinion, then obviously we can nominate different students to justify why until we come to a final conclusion and the correct answer is given. We could, if we wanted to make it more difficult, again, we can hide this and we can get students to actually type a sentence giving the main point in the chat box if we've got a stronger class. So I like this particular hide feature here. And then, of course, we can move on to the second task, which is a more detailed reading task, where students then read and answer more detailed questions. Now, one thing about reading is that actually we could give students this for homework to do before the class, because there's an argument that, do we really want students to sit for 10 minutes potentially all together in silence reading something that they could do before the class starts? And that then allows more time for discussion and checking of ideas in the lesson itself. I think face-to-face lessons, online lessons, the live lessons where we're actually face-to-face with our students live in real time, that's the time for communication where possible. Now, you're going to get students who don't necessarily, of course, they don't do the homework. So if that happens, then we can get students to, we can get them to tell each other. So we can put them into breakout rooms and a student who read it tell another one who didn't what it's about. We could get one student in front of the whole class to summarize it. Or we could tell students at the beginning of the lesson, when we're doing the warm-up, if you've not done the reading, can you do it now, please? And then they do that while you're leading into the lesson. But that's one thing to think about with the reading. Okay, I'm going to speed up a bit now because of time. So pronunciation, all of the audio in the digital tools, they're built into the presentation tool, so we can just literally press play.
Unit 6.
Okay, and you've also got here the transcript. So you can actually choose one particular one.
He's being paid millions.
So if they have trouble with that one.
He's being paid millions.
Okay, so we can get students to do drilling online. I think it's absolutely fine. So the first thing they do here is actually to notice the lack of stress on B, and then we go to the next activity where they have to actually listen and repeat. We can do that. We can drill them. They can mute themselves. They can practice saying it out loud several times, and then we can nominate students to do it individually, and we can help them with their pronunciation individually. You know, we've had orchestras in different people in their living rooms from different parts of the world coming together, creating orchestras and choirs over the last few weeks. So we can definitely attempt to do drilling. It might be a bit messy, but it you know, at the end of the day, it's helping students to get their mouth around it and giving them the chance to get their mouth around it. So I think that's the important thing, is giving them that opportunity. Then if we actually come to, so here we've got a speaking, in our speaking lessons, we've always got a model somewhere on the page so that students can actually hear a discussion first. So again, here you can just play the recording, students listen to, and we can check their understanding. But there's also a transcript here. So if you click, here we go.
I love that film. I love that film. I love that film.
I love the way she says it. I mean, I just love that intonation. So if one of the things that I think is really important to do with a model is to actually get students to think about, why was that a good discussion about TV and films? What made it successful? And they can say things like, well, they both contributed, they both asked each other questions, they showed interest. When we talk about showing interest, we can actually highlight, we can drill that so that they can show, you have to sound enthusiastic. Then of course, when students do the task, then we can sort of refer them to this as a checklist, and then they can assess themselves against it. Did you show interest? Did you ask questions? Because I think, as I said, formative assessment is very important in online lessons, and self and peer assessment is one example of that. But students need to know what they're peer assessing or self-assessing by. They need some criteria. So actually analysing the model and coming up with some ideas is really important. Now, when students actually do the task and they actually do the speaking, there are obviously different options here. We've got the breakout rooms. We've got students actually maybe discussing just as a whole class, if we've got a smaller class, and they could also use the chat box as well, although if we've got a larger class, that could be unmanageable and becomes more difficult to discuss as well. So one thing you could do is use a tool outside of your platform if you felt that you were confident enough to do that. Something like Padlet, for example, where you can create a board, but you can add audio, so students can record themselves and they can actually do a little monologue. It wouldn't be a discussion, it would be a monologue. You could, if you've got mature adult classes, you could put students into groups, and you could actually get students to create their own Zoom room and invite you, or they could create their own, WhatsApp chat group or something like that, and they can have this discussion in writing or orally in a different tool. They can go away and do it for 10 minutes. You can drop in on different students, and then you can provide feedback again in the main classroom. So there are obviously, a few different ways of doing it. If you have large classes and you don't have breakout rooms, there are opportunities outside of your platform. Right, I think probably I talked a little bit too much, but just briefly, feedback. Obviously, you're going to want to provide feedback, so you can encourage students to do peer and self-assessment, and then in the chat box, they can actually share some ideas of what they were proud of, what they think they did well, and maybe one thing that they'd like to improve. You can also obviously provide feedback as well. You can do that orally, and then you can bring up your you could, I think we'll clear all that. It's clear on my rubbish drawing. You can obviously type some of the sentences. You had good examples of the sentences and also examples that are not so good, and you can get students to type the answers into the chat box. So those are some ideas from me of how we might use our digital tools and resources using a platform like Zoom to create hopefully collaborative, interesting, and also useful and effective lessons so that learners are actually achieving goals. I think it is important that we do actually make sure that we do and provide time for reflection at the end of lessons so that students can recognise progress, because one of the things that sometimes they feel that maybe online learning isn't quite the same, so we need to show them that they are actually learning. Right, I'm going to come back to you now. I'm going to bring up I'm going to stop showing my screen. There we go. And I'm going to go back to my slides. So in this session, and I've shown you the roadmap digital tools, I've done a little bit of a walkthrough of the platforms tools. So we've looked at Zoom. I've done a bit of a walkthrough of a B1 Plus roadmap online lesson. So obviously not every activity, but kind of common activities that we look at in the book. And we've got time for questions. But before that, I just want to share with you a few things. So English.com is the website you need to go to in order to get onto the Pearson English portal. And that's where you can access your digital tools and resources. And if you want more information about Roadmap, then if you go to english.com/roadmap, you can find out more about the course there. So the spring days, I'm going to give you time to write that down, but the next slide is all about the spring days. So our spring sessions are finishing tomorrow. So at 2 o'clock, there is, it's 2 o'clock, there's a final plenary with Ken Beattie, so you might want to join us for that. And of course, we've had previous sessions, so hopefully you managed to come to those as well. So just a reminder, so english.com/online learning is where you'll be able to register for that final plenary tomorrow. And just a reminder that for those of you who joined us a little bit late, so this webinar was recorded, so I hope that's okay. Within 2 weeks of this event, and probably sooner, but within 2 weeks, you will get a link to the recording in case you want to, I don't know, review something or check something, a personalised certificate. And you will also receive a virtual goodie bag as well with some materials that will hopefully be helpful to you. So it's time for questions then. I'm not sure if you've typed questions. So Richard is going to join me. He's been having a look.
Hi there, Lindsay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great. We've had a couple of questions so far. Actually, mainly there are a lot of comments, but questions-wise is, can you share the whiteboard and the chat at the same time?
Yes, so I'm not sharing my screen, but basically when you share in Zoom, when you share your screen, if you hover your mouse at the top, the toolbar drops down, and if you click on the 3 dots, you can bring up chat. That's it.
Okay. Go forward. Another question was on Roadmap specifically, and what the target audience, the learner audience, is for Roadmap.
So it's adults, but we had in mind that some teenagers might use it. So adults to us is 16 and over. It's older adults, I would say. But yeah, it's an adult course, so it's general English. So it's designed to help students to communicate better. Every lesson in the main unit leads to a very clear speaking goal. So there's a lot of emphasis on developing learners' confidence in speaking. They have grammar and vocabulary input along the way, reading and listening practice, and then you've got the develop your listening, reading and writing skills lessons at the back of the book that you can bring in to help learners to develop their sub-skills as well. So if you've got students that you feel would benefit from that, then it's very useful. I saw actually, Richard, that someone asked if you can download material for students. Yes, so all of the resources that I showed you, so the photocopyables, the pronunciation photocopyables, the mediation skills photocopyables, the vocabulary grammar photocopyables, and the tests and the audio are all downloadable. They're all, so obviously the audio is MP4 and the video as well, but you've got all the worksheets that are PDF format that you can download and share with your students.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Just looking through to see if there are any other questions. One question is, what should we do if students are shy or reluctant to share their answers?
If you're shy or reluctant to share their answers, well, I think, firstly, if students are shy, I think we need to respect that, because you can't change somebody's character. And I think that it's really important that we don't put them on the spot. So I would certainly not ask them to speak out in front of the class. But I think the chat box is a really good way of encouraging them to participate in the lesson. So they can chat to the whole group. They may feel more confident about chatting to the whole group, or if not, you could actually agree that they can chat to you privately and they can share answers with you privately. It does mean you do have to be looking at the chat during the lesson. So you do have to multitask a bit, but that is one way that you can make sure that you build confidence with those students so that they feel able to participate. Hopefully we can then get them to chatting in the group chat, and usually in sort of breakout rooms in pairs and things like that, they're usually okay, aren't they? But it's usually sort of in front of whole class it's more difficult. But maybe making sure they've got preparation time. We've got preparation tasks. Students have preparation activities before they do speaking tasks in our books, so that can help to build their confidence as well and prepare them, I think. Can I just answer Michaela's saying, I've been using Zoom, but there's no breakout rooms. I don't know if there's a version of Zoom with no breakout rooms, but certainly the version I use, which is the free version, does have breakout rooms. So it might be worth just checking that out and doing a little bit more research on that, because I thought all versions had it. Anyway.
Perhaps there's another question that's come in perhaps related to the shyness, is what should I do when my students are afraid to make mistakes in answering questions?
Well, I think it's the same online and in face-to-face classrooms, to be honest. I think we just need to create an atmosphere where maybe we don't correct errors, we let errors go. If students are really that nervous about it, don't correct them, just get them speaking first of all, and then we can start to deal with errors a bit later. But it's making them aware that errors are part of learning, aren't they? We all make errors. I make errors. I made loads of errors when I was talking to you, sentences, because I'm thinking of something else and things don't quite make sense. It's just, even in your own language, you make mistakes, and maybe it's making students aware of that. It's all part of communication, but it's certainly part of learning is taking risks. So, I think that is a key thing, but also maybe if we get them to type in the chat box a little bit more at first, and they may feel that their errors are a bit more on show, but they also have a little bit more time to come up with an answer as well. Hope that.
Thank you, Lindsay. I think now we've come to the end of the hour, so I think it's time to wind up this webinar, unfortunately. As Lindsay mentioned, we are finishing Spring Days tomorrow with a plenary by Dr. Ken Beattie at 2 p.m. UK time. So please join us there. But thank you for coming to this webinar. And particularly thank you to Lindsay for taking us through various tips about how to teach remotely and just using Roadmap as an example.
Thank you. So yeah, thank you everyone, and good luck with your online teaching and stay safe. Bye for now.